This episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Byron Seeds. The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds. This episode of Back to the Roots is also brought to you by Soil Biotics. Soil Biotics Organic Growth Boost is a liquid humic acid product that promotes the conversion of nutrient elements such as N, P, and K into forms more available to plants, thereby improving uptake of nutrients, micronutrients, and water. It also improves the biological structure of the soil by helping to neutralize both acid and alkaline soils. Soil Biotics SB 4400 is a liquid product containing a combination of living, beneficial microorganisms that allows plants to take in nitrogen from the atmosphere, enhances natural growth promoting functions in the plant, and can increase organic matter and CEC in the soil. Soil Biotics organic products are formulated to work together to provide a continuous, beneficial growth environment to meet all of your organic agricultural needs. For product details, visit soilbiotics.com.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, we are at the Homestead Festival in Columbia, Tennessee, and we are lucky enough to be joined by Joel Salatin. Joel Salatin, with his family, owns Polyface Farms in Swoop, Virginia. He has been featured in the New York Times bestseller as well as award-winning documentaries throughout the years, while also offering farm services to more than 5,000 families, 50 restaurants, 10 retail outlets, and a farmer's market. Joel has a passion for mentoring young people, inspiring visitors, and promoting local regenerative food and farming systems. Joel, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. It's a real honor and a delight to be with you.
Can you go into a little more of your background and what got you started and when was that?
Sure. Well, we have this real interesting history, and the older I get, the more I appreciate how different it was. So my dad, or in fact my grandfather, was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it first came out in like 1948, and so he always had this big organic garden and an octagonal chicken house and all sorts of, a diversity of vegetables and things. Like a quarter-acre garden, which is a pretty big garden. And so he came from that theme. Well, my dad flew in the Navy in World War II, and after the Navy went to Indiana University on the GI Bill, got a business administration degree. His dream was to go have a farm in a developing country because he saw the social societal changes in the U.S. even at that early stage, starting to head towards socialism and the kind of things that are really coming to roost today, and just saw that the developing country was a new frontier. It was a new place, and so. Well, how do I? I'm a Midwestern. I don't have any money. How do I get a farm? And so he was real sharp, and he studied Spanish. He got his degree in business, and then went to Middlebury in Vermont for 6 months. Studied Spanish, and then hitchhiked from Vermont to Mexico, spent 6 months, and then came back and sat for the Foreign Civil Service exam in Spanish, passed it the first time, and went as a bilingual accountant with Texas Oil Company into Venezuela. And Texas Oil Company, which eventually became Texaco, well, of course, it was the beginning of the oil ventures there. This was post-World War II. And they wanted a bilingual accountant to handle the money because Americans handled the management, Venezuelans handled the dirty work, and the tension always was about money. And they called them man camps. The guys would come out and live for a week and go back with their families on the weekends usually. And 7 years he was able to save up enough to buy this 1,000-acre farm in the Venezuelan highlands, and the goal was to have dairy and broilers, to raise chickens and dairy. He saw those as the two kind of. They didn't need any more banana people. They didn't need any more pineapples, right? Mm-hmm. We were on the equator. That was plentiful. Mm-hmm. Macadamia nuts, grew like black walnuts in Ohio, right? So he saw dairy and broilers, and so we began raising chickens, and on this farm. And of course, this is 1950s, and Venezuela, didn't have a lot of electricity, and so the way people shopped for food was you'd have the banana vendor, the papaya vendor, the coffee vendor, the chicken vendor, and they would go through the town, and individual families would buy from these vendors for dinner. You didn't have a refrigerator. You didn't have, and this was the equator too. There wasn't a culture of pantries and larders like we have in where we get blizzards and cold, right?
Sure.
And so in the tropics, you just don't have that kind of mindset. So it's daily buying from these. Well, the indigenous chickens in Venezuela at that time all had subtherapeutic pneumonia. They had respiratory. They had snot. Nasal drip from their beak because of the unsanitary conditions they were raised in. And so, the farmers would come into the village square, how the Latin American countries are. You'd come into the village square, and the vendors then would negotiate and buy from the farmers, and then they'd put the chicken guy would put it on a pole live and carry it around town to his customers. And if the senora wanted chicken for dinner, she would buy the chicken, go out and kill it, and have it for dinner. Mm-hmm. And there was enough food knowledge in the culture that they knew about this nasal drip, this respiratory thing, and so there was a premium for chickens that were drier, that had a drier beak, and they would run their fingers down their beak, and this one's dry, and so you could obviously vendors then, the middlemen, developed a brand of having the better chicken, so they were always looking for clean chickens, and the customers were always looking for a clean chicken. And so because we didn't raise them in the open sewers and the yards and the squat pots and all that in an unhygienic situation, our chickens were real clean. They didn't have any of this nasal drip. And so very, very quickly, Dad cornered the market. Here's this gringo, right, mm-hmm. cornering the market for local chicken. Well, people would be lined up to get our chicken, and here's the other, the Venezuelans in their booth next to, they're not getting any business. And so, true to form, the farmers then immediately took us as witches. So we were practicing witchcraft and voodooism because they didn't believe, how can you, they didn't come and ask, Senor Salatin, how do you do this? They assumed that it was some sort of magic or, mm-hmm. voodoo or witchcraft. And so in 1959, when there was a junta, and Perez Jimenez was, ousted for power. When you have a junta like that and law and order break down in a culture, it gives license for a lot of scores to be settled that are not really germane to the political situation. And so as things spiraled into anarchy, then we as Americans living out on the land, angering the neighboring farmers because we took their livelihoods, we were prime target for retaliatory stuff. And so basically we fled the front doors, the machine guns came in the back door and lost everything. And
the land and everything was gone. They just took everything.
Took everything. Yeah. We couldn't get any protection. The constable, what we would call a sheriff, it was basically who pays me more. That's who I protect. Well, the guerrillas, the rebels, they had more money than we did, and more political clout as well. And so we stayed another 6 months. We spent some time in a little town named El Limon, and then in Caracas for a couple of months. Dad met with every, the Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, all the highest. Nobody would help. Nobody could do anything. And so the only thing to do was to walk away from it. And so he was 39. I know when I turned 40, I had the thought, man, if I lost it all today, would I start over again? And his conviction, it really went up in my estimation for having. So we came back to the States, landed.
Were you around during that time?
I was 4.
Okay.
I was 4. So I don't remember much of the farm. I remember the trauma of, for example, running away from rebels in the jungle. Sure, yep. I remember Caracas and some of that unrest there. But so I don't remember a lot of it. But I share it when, you ask the question for your background. This is such an unusual background. Mm-hmm. And it colored our politics. It colored our the greatest blessing I have, I think, is being raised in a family that truly was immune to peer dependency. Because when we came back here then, and Dad left his heart in Venezuela. He was there 12 years, loved the people, loved the culture, loved the language. I mean, how can you not love a place where bananas grow in the backyard, pineapples grow wild, mangoes, you just go out and pick them, on the field edges. And so now looking back, our family is very mindful that was a true blessing that we got stopped early in the game, because if we had been there now and been successful, we'd have probably lost something a lot bigger than something early and embryonic. So, these things have a way to work out,
But boy, at the moment, that is not an easy thing to deal with.
No, it broke Dad's heart, and he never got over it. I mean, he died at 66. And we believe a lot of it was just that trauma, that dream that he was so focused on for a long time. So that's why we didn't settle. When we came back, we landed in Philadelphia on a merchant vessel in Easter Sunday, 1961. And the reason we didn't go back to the Midwest, where all Mom's family, Mom grew up in Ohio, Dad grew up in Indiana, and the reason we didn't go back there was because Dad was still hoping, when things settled, to go back to Venezuela, and he wanted to be within a day's drive of the Venezuelan embassy in D.C. to be able to go and get paperwork and I mean, like we can be back in a week kind of thing. And so we looked at farms from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, down through the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, as far south as like Raleigh, North Carolina, kind of an arc around D.C. and settled then finally into Shenandoah Valley. We found the cheapest, most worn out, gullied rock pile that we could find, very, very cheap, completely worn out land, 16-foot deep gullies. We measured the deepest one. There were large areas, a quarter acre in size, that were nothing but shale. In other words, no weeds, no dirt, no nothing. 8 feet of topsoil had washed off, since the European development.
From farming practices?
Yeah, from tillage.
Yep.
The Shenandoah Valley was the breadbasket of the Confederacy during the Civil War. Cyrus McCormick invented the reaper 10 miles from our farm in his blacksmith shop, which is 1837, which is the official beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the mechanical reaper. So you got rid of the scythe, right? I mean, that was the big machine to be able to harvest grain. And then later, of course, the combine that combined the reaper with the cutting with the winnowing. That was the combine. That's why it's called a combine. So here we were, went out and got this place, started over. And so Dad called in both private and public ag experts. How do I make a living on this farm? It was about 150 acres open and 400 in forest, in woodland. And a lot of erosion. There were steep hillsides with the terraced cow paths on them. and we actually in the first 10 years reforested about 60 acres. So we dropped the open land down to about 95 acres actually over the first 10 years. Just steep hillsides that had gullies on them and erosion and everything. And all the advice was the same. Chemical fertilizers, plant corn, build silos, borrow more money, graze the woods. It didn't matter whether it was a public, like an extension service person or, like Doan management consultants. It didn't matter. The advice was all the same. Well, as an economist, he knew that the chemical approach was like a drug addiction. You could never get satisfied. You had to just keep using more and more, and it got more expensive. It was a treadmill. And he knew as an economist that borrowing more money was not the answer. We had to figure out how to do it on our own. And so I'm so thankful that we didn't have money. We were hungry, and that made us very creative. Hunger makes you creative, right? And so we started looking. Well, what's nature's template? And it's really pretty simple. There are animals in nature everywhere. There's no place in nature that doesn't have animals. Animals move; they don't stay locked up in buildings. There is an integration between the animals and their diet. In other words, it's not shipped in from far distances. The manure is a blessing on the place that the feed stocks come from. There's this integrated approach, and then soil is built by carbon. Biomass decomposes, and soil is built that way. And then from an economic standpoint, he realized that as a small farmer, we couldn't compete at the commodity level because the margins were too small. We had to wear the hats of the marketer, the distributor, the processor, those notorious middlemen, that make all the profits that the farmers complain about. We had to wear those hats so that we could, with a small production, generate enough income and margin to be able to make a living. So that was kind of the path we started down. And so in the 60s, we started experimenting with composting. We got a chipper. Dad developed some portable electric fencing systems. We started moving the cows around. When I was 10 in 1967, I got my first chickens. And Dad met a guy that had portable infrastructure. We built portable rabbit shelters, portable chicken shelters. He raised veal calves in a portable milk shed where the milk cows would come up, the calves would come out and nurse and then go in. And so we're very into all this experimentation and multi-speciation, and can we integrate the different animals and we grew a great big garden, had a couple pigs, and but Dad was an accountant and worked in town. Mom was a school teacher, worked in the school, and those off-farm jobs paid because we lost everything in Venezuela, so that paid for another mortgage. They started over, and it was just, for us, it was a glorified homestead to grow up in. We never made money, we weren't commercial, but we grew all of our own food, milked a couple cows, raised our pigs on whey. We made cottage cheese and that. And so when I was about 12 or 13, my chicken thing was starting to expand, needed more market. And we had an old leftover not farmers market. It was called the curb market. It was a direct farmers market developed in the Depression because farmers had plenty of food but no money. And people in the city needed money. And so our city had this curb market. By the time I hit 14, it was down. In the 1930s, it was huge. I mean, it was the Walmart. It was like a local Walmart for the area, and then here came the 50s and TV dinners and 60s. So by the time mid 70s, here I'm 14. Early 70s, and there were two elderly matrons left. One of them made cakes and pastries, and one of them was a kind of a diversified homestead, cured ham and vegetables and some pastries and things. And here I came with animals and eggs, and so throughout high school, every Saturday of the year, I was up at 4 o'clock. because the market opened at 6 a.m. and I was down there selling stuff. It closed at noon, and selling stuff, and I wouldn't trade that experience. Those two grandmas in my life. I was 14, and these two elderly ladies, they took me under wing. They did marketing. How do you handle customers? How do you display things? How do you message? How do you talk to people? I mean, it was just, I start to cry. I mean, it was that valuable. Talk about, a wonderful So while the other guys in school were all being jocks on the football field, basketball team, I was out with my garden, my chickens, the milk cows. We churned butter, and we were about 20 years ahead of our time. Mm-hmm. This was the early 70s. Mm-hmm. We were about 20 years ahead of our time. So when I went to college, nobody else in the family was interested in this, and so we shut the whole thing down. I went to college, came back, and of course the two elderly ladies gave up quickly after I left. And but the thing about that market was, they had an agreement, grandfathered agreement from the 1930s, that we could sell without inspection. So we could butcher beef, chicken, we could make anything. We could cut round steak, grind burger, cook chicken, sell pot pies, all without inspection. Butter, buttermilk, cottage cheese, no inspection whatsoever. And so I grew up in this wonderful entrepreneurial free market atmosphere. And so that has colored our politics a little bit about food freedom and food choice, and the opportunity that would be there if farmers could actually get unprejudicial access to their neighborhoods, in marketing. And so then, after college, now I'm after college, and I'm wanting to get back to the farm. So I'm back to the same question Dad had. All right, how do I make a living on this farm? And I realized, you know what? I could milk 10 cows by hand. We always had Guernseys. And I could milk 10 cows by hand, sell the milk to neighbors at retail. In other words, not high because it's organic, not high because it's grass, not just regular retail price. And I could make a nice living hand milking 10 cows and selling it. There was only one problem. It was illegal. And the difference between me and God is, God forgives and forgets. We don't, as humans, right? We can forgive, but we don't forget. And so I've forgiven, but I've never forgotten. And
how'd you find out it was illegal? Did they crack down on you?
No. We just knew. I mean, okay. raw milk was like, that's like, cocaine. In fact, it's worse than cocaine. Because cocaine, you can't buy it and you can't sell it. Milk is hypocritical because you can buy it but you can't sell it. So the prohibition is only on one side. So now I'm so how do I make a living on this farm? So I'm there. I get a job at the local newspaper. I had a flair for writing and stuff, and so I got on at the local newspaper as a journalist, and I'm putting money away, living at home and on the farm on the weekends, and conniving and trying to figure out how to do it. Teresa and I got married, and we built an apartment in the attic of the farmhouse, put a kitchen up there and everything. And so we had a common interest, but we had a separate quarters up there. Lived on $300 a month. Drove a $50 car. A $50 car is cheaper than most horses, and so we drove this real cheap car. Took our honeymoon in that old $50 car. And grew all of our own food. We never had a TV. Still don't have a TV. We just put every penny away. And in a couple of years, we were able to save enough that we realized, as cheaply as we were living, we could live for 1 year on the farm. Quit the town job and live for 1 year on the farm.
Now, what year was this?
So that would have been in September 24, 1982.
Okay.
That was my red letter day. September 24, 1982. I walked out of that newspaper office and became full-time farming. And I fully expected that we would run through the nest egg in a year and I'd be doing something else. What enabled? A lot of people ask, how do you know when you can jump? A lot of people would like to farm, but they got the
consistent
job.
Paycheck.
Yeah. Yep. We call it the golden change, right? Mm-hmm. That paycheck. Mm-hmm. And so first of all, we didn't have any debt. which that's number one. That gives you. I mean, I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan. Okay, I mean get out of debt, because debt makes you do things that you have to earn money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So get out of debt.
And was this, before you go too far, was this on the original 140 acres or whatever it was?
Well, it was 550. We had reforested 60 acres. Okay. So now we're down about 95 acres open and 450 in woods. It's very much a forest farm.
Yeah.
But we had all this wonderful trial. We'd done a lot of different things, and we were by that time we were seeing some progress. I mean, some clover instead of broom sedge, and where there were brambles and thistles, we're seeing orchard grass. And we never plowed, we never planted a seed, but we're just watching the land start to change. I mean, where we ran the chicken shelters, that was like painting it green, So we had kind of the rudiments of a recipe, if you will, but we'd never really made the cake.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, told Teresa, I said, if there's one great decision I ever made in my life, it was marrying Teresa, because she is the quintessential homemaker. I mean, she cans 800 quarts of stuff a summer. She's gardened. She drove the tractor for me. We were really a team. And she was more frugal than I, and still is. She's the saver, and and was happy to live in the attic. We called it a penthouse. You can call it. It's like half full, half empty, right? It's, are we abundant or scarce? And we were up there, and so we saved up enough to live for 1 year. I fully expected to go back to work, but one thing that I learned was I wasn't too proud to push a wheelbarrow full of concrete. I wasn't too proud to wash dishes in a restaurant. And when I realized how employable I was, it pulled those golden chains, that paycheck that you just mentioned. It pulled that off, because suddenly I realized I'm not too proud to do anything, and anybody would love to have me because I work hard, I think, and I put in 110%. Well, and I show up on time. I mean, isn't that what everybody wants, right? And so I said, let's just do it for a year, and we'll see where we are. Well, what happened was, what we didn't anticipate was the domino effect that coming back home created. We put gas in the car once a month instead of once a week. Big change. I was there for every calf that was born. So instead of losing a calf, we saved a calf. That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I call that slippage. I was there when the green beans needed to be weeded. Not, well, I'll get to it 2 weekends hence when I have enough time to be home. Mm-hmm. No, I was there. There's a big difference between hitting them with a stirrup hoe and having the weeds, taller than the beans. Mm-hmm. And where are the beans, Mm-hmm. And so all that slippage started to change. The other thing that happened was, just by being there and being flexible, I could help neighbors do things. I had a neighbor that wanted to plant trees for 3 years, and so I sat on the back of his tree planter planting trees, but he paid me cash. Okay, $600. But when you're living on $300 a month, $600 in cash.
That's 2 months.
Exactly, it's 2 months. Yeah. Another guy, he needed a fence built. Well, it was going to go through a woods, and he was in turmoil about, having all the trees cut and stuff so they could get their equipment through. I looked at it and I said, I could just dig those holes by hand. We'll just put it through there. We won't have to cut all this. And so I went over and dug all the holes by hand. $1,200. And so these little neighbor kind of cash things became really, critical. Like, I can live on this for a quarter of the year, and that stretched that nest egg out. Mm-hmm. To where it kind of became the widow's cruse of oil, and it just stretched and stretched. It was tight, man. It was tight, but it stretched, and at about 3 years, we realized we're going to make it. It was about 3 years,
and as long as you had that in-town job, you never would have had the relationships with the neighbors to have the opportunity to do that. But because you were on the farm and available to help them, these opportunities presented
That's right.
themselves.
It was totally as a result of the flexibility. I now had time.
Mm-hmm.
I had time to be able to step into some of those opportunities that I never would have been able to do.
The other thing too, with being what I've observed with farmers that have an off-farm job, is you called it slippage. Mm-hmm. And just in real straightforward words, the money they make, that consistent paycheck, they are usually losing it in on-farm productivity.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because you're not seeing things in a timely way. You're not getting things done in a timely way. And you know how on a farm, time is everything. I mean, a week. Think about making hay. Mm-hmm. What a difference a week can make, mm-hmm. from really top quality good hay to, well,
junk.
Now it's kind of lignified, not too good. Or rain or whatever, right? That was a huge thing, and so because we lived so cheaply, we didn't have to make a lot of money. I think if there was one thing that I'd want listeners to hear through this today, I mean, there's a bunch of things, but one is that because we didn't have to earn much, we didn't have to make much. And because we didn't have to make much, it let us cultivate things that take time, like a market, like customers. So I was able to, for example, put together a slide program that I would do for Rotary Club, Kiwanis, Ruritan, all the philanthropic groups. They're always looking for an interesting, evening speaker or dinner speaker. And so I put how to heal the land with pastured livestock, and soft sell, information dense. At the end, if you'd like to participate in this, glad to talk to you, and you'd pick up 2 or 3 customers. But this allowed us to grow slowly, to grow slow enough that we could metabolize the customer base, metabolize the messaging, metabolize the service. All the processing equipment. When do we get an automatic chicken picker, for example? What level of equipment do we need? And it allowed us to metabolize it gently that way. And that brings up why it was so valuable to have mobile infrastructure, because that way we could scale by duplication rather than scale by centralization. And that's huge. If you want to raise chickens for Tyson, you got to build a $500,000, barn, right? I mean, straight out of the box. For us, all you got to do is take some pocket change, build a little field shelter, and you're in business. And if you like it, you can build a second one. If you like it, you can build a third. Right now, we have 200 of these. So we have the same amount of roof space as a Tyson factory chicken house, but they're in 200 modules mm-hmm. that we created over 25 years of scaling with modules as opposed to centralization.
Because you could expand as you needed to expand, and you weren't dropping and then just doing production for Tyson or whoever. So you could really use that module and just build it as your business demanded it.
Yes. And I think that if we took that idea, because the naysayers to me, well, this is all sweet and nice, but how does it feed the world? How does it scale? Right? I mean, that's always the big question. How does it scale? And it scales fine. It just you need more farmers, and you scale with modules. And when COVID hit, just imagine. I mean, to take this kind of to a macro level, imagine that if instead of having 150 5,000 person mega processing facilities in the U.S., if we had instead 150,000 small neighborhood 20 employee processing facilities, cheese, cannery, beef, chicken processing, all right, embedded in communities all over the country, taking integrated product, proximate to market, using neighborhood labor, right? Think of how much more resilient that would have been.
And I'm going to play the part of the naysayer now and just say, do you see that happening? Those small, and can it happen? Because, I mean, first of all, they're going to get fought by the big boys.
Yeah.
And second of all, you got to have people that want to do this.
Right. Well, great question. So what I'm seeing, and I've been at this game, I'm getting to be one of the old dogs in this. You know, we've been at this a long time, and what I'm seeing is for the first time in my life. Well, here's the coolest story. Like a couple months ago, I'm watching a lady we have an on-farm store. She's looking at the meat counter, and she's kind of gasping. I said, you know, is everything okay? She says, goodness, your what was it? It was sirloin steak. She said, your sirloin steak is $9 a pound at Costco. I just was at Costco, and it's $16 a pound. And I mean, like, yes, this epiphany.
I'm too cheap.
Yeah, well, suddenly, so here's then I look at the Wall Street Journal, and I see where Tyson has raised their beef prices 32% in the last 12 months. Now, that was a couple months ago. Maybe they've probably raised it even more since then. And we're saying, we don't need to raise it 32%. Yeah, we've got higher gas prices. We've got some extra expenses, but, 10-12% is plenty for us. And suddenly, I'm realizing, to answer the question, for the first time in my life, the quote-unquote efficiency of scale is starting to indicate not efficiency but fragility. And so the word resilience is starting to trump, and I shouldn't even use that word trump, because it's starting to overpower, to become more valuable in the discussion than efficiency. And people are beginning to realize if we first aren't resilient, then we don't even have anything to be efficient about. We have to start with resilience. There was an interesting study just done on British Parliament, where somebody went in and looked at the last 10 years of all the British Parliament discussion, and picked out the number of times efficient or efficiency was used versus resilient and resiliency. And what they found was, in the last 10 years, efficient and efficiency has dropped in half, and resilient and resiliency has doubled. And so, these are kind of macro trend lines that you start seeing. And so what's happened is that right now, the supply chain debacles, COVID protocols, our litigious culture where everything has to be, triple duplicated, signed off on to protect you from liability. Those things are gumming up the works in big businesses, which are like aircraft carriers. So here we are navigating shoals and disturbing waters as we enter. I mean, anyone who's thinking today realizes we're in kind of some disturbing waters, and that's not a political statement, it just is, all right? And so when waters are disturbed, you want to be in a little speedboat where you can navigate the rocks and the shoals. You don't want to be in an aircraft carrier that takes 10 miles to turn around. And there are books out on this. It's not the big that eats the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. The operative term at Wall Street right now is about being nimble. Well, what's nimbleness is being able to react. And I'm realizing I don't wake up in the morning wondering, so there's 25 of us that earn a living from the farm now. And I don't wake up in the morning wondering, oh no, is somebody over in that division going to file an OSHA complaint against my quarantine policies, that I didn't. The big companies, they can't sleep at night for all this pressure that's on them, right? And so here we are. To answer the question, I see a fragmentation that is very healthy, a fragmentation that is starting to antidote the centralized, fragile scale that's carrying this.
Well, I think there's kind of a void becoming obvious to anybody that has their ear even halfway to the ground.
Yes.
And the hard part now is shifting into there's got to be people to fill that void.
Yes.
And I think we're here at the Homestead Festival, and hopefully that kind of group can fill in. But
I think it's a great. I appreciate your theme there, and typically people say, well, not very many people want to be farmers, but on our farm, we run a formal apprenticeship program. It's very rigid, very formal, and we have 100 applicants for 10 spots every year. And I think that if we have mission statements that are noble enough, sacred enough, attractive enough for the next generation, they will step up to the plate. The problem is that most farmers are not presenting a drop, a compelling, attractive narrative. There's no money in it. It's it's dusty and it's smelly and it's noisy and and there's this kind of hermit curmudgeon thing, as opposed to embracing. Well, let's solve everybody's problem. I mean, for the first time, we have customers walking up to us now asking, "Can I get food insurance from you?" And they've got home insurance, they've got flood insurance, fire insurance, automobile insurance. You insure things that you're afraid you're going to lose, right? And here they're coming asking, "How do I get food insurance?" What they're asking is, "How do I get first class with you? How do I make sure when the wheels fall off, I want to be your number one." If you're eating, I want to eat, right? And it's this whole security thing. And so I think that there is definitely a shaking and an awakening within the culture. Not everybody, for sure. There are plenty of people that are completely asleep, but there are more and more people. Listen, in the last 6 months, I've had four billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires, contact me out of the blue saying, "Can you help me create an agrarian bunker?"
Wow.
Okay. I mean, these are guys, they've got, I've got 2 daughters and a wife, and if the wheels fall off, I need a safe place. And there's this intuitive understanding. The safe place is not in the 10th floor condo in Manhattan. The safe place is somewhere out in the country. There's this kind of intuitive understanding. When things go down, I don't want to be in the city. And we are literally, the attendance here show we are literally riding what I call a homestead tsunami that, in my opinion, is actually more mature than the hippie movement of the Vietnam era, the early 1970s, the Back to the Land movement of the early 1970s, and so I'm here's where I am culturally. I'm pessimistic. I think the culture is heading to some pretty difficult times, but I think that you and I as individuals, if we surround ourselves geographically proximate with people who know how to grow things, build things, and fix things, grow things, fix things, and build things. Those 3 things, we need to be building these communities with that eclectic skill set. That's where to invest.
I just want to go back to, you said as you were getting started, part of what got you going was the slow build. And everything you just said there is that there's going to be opportunity for anybody doing those 3 things.
Yes.
And that opportunity is going to come fast. And fast, eat slow, but stay small enough that you're in control. How is that balanced?
Well, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? And I don't know that anybody balances it. I mean, we've had our, we're growing too fast. We got to slow this down. How can we keep up? And we've had this. Nothing is ever a nice gentle line, right? It's a fragmented line, but I would just say that as people wonder where to invest their money, where to invest their time, start investing it in things that have real practical value. Invest in a skill. Learn how to fix a small engine. Take a course in electricity. Learn how to plumb a house. How to put PVC pipes. Mike Rowe, with Dirty Jobs. I mean, we just have this. Well, Temple Grandin was talking about it about our that we don't have practical skill anymore. I mean, look at the. I'm not a public school fan at all, but the fact that that all we hear about is STEM. Science, technology, engineering, math, and nobody's talking about how to build a chair and how to put PVC pipe together, how to fix a leaky faucet. These are things that practical skills that we're really lacking.
I find it really disappointing how a skill, say masonry, because I learned how to lay block and brick, but masonry, building the basic structures, electrical, plumbing, like you mentioned, that is looked at as physical labor, and they don't want to do it. Yet those are trades and skills that will always be needed, no matter what happens. Yeah, if you're building new construction houses, okay, the economy might slow that down, but it will never take away your skill of building something. And I just find that so disappointing that in the public schools, people look at the trade schools as, why would you go there? Right. There's so much value in that versus learning a bunch of things you're never going to use.
Sure. I'm waiting for the day when the urban soccer mom is proud of her little Mary or Jimmy because they've announced they want to go be a farmer. And she's proud to tell the other moms, well, when they're talking about their little child prodigies that program software or play Bach on the piano at 5 years old. Well, my little, Jenny or Jimmy is going to be a farmer, and all the other soccer moms say, wow, cool, that's awesome. I'm waiting for that day, and that's one reason why, when I do presentations, I'm quick to talk about the self-valuation, the mission. Most farmers just kind of see themselves, well, I'm just a dairy farmer, or I'm just a wheat grower, or no. Let's talk about us building soil, creating a resource legacy for our grandchildren. I mean, that's noble stuff, and making a profit is good too, and I don't shy away from that at all. And that's one reason why I want my models and my prototypes to actually, I want people to make a white collar salary on a farm. I do. There's no reason why. And I ask people when I do urban programs. I ask urbanites. I say, what would you feel like if your farmer drove up to farmers market in a Mercedes Benz? Would that be okay? What would go through your head? And it really hit. Now, I'm not interested in materialism and everybody no, but I'm just saying, do you think it's okay if your farmer is making as much money as you?
What was the reaction? What's the
response?
They
kind of look away and they they look down.
No, he's supposed to have that ratty old Ford truck that's halfway broke down.
Where are your bib? Where's your worn out bibs with the raggedy bandana hanging out of the pocket?
Piece of straw.
Exactly. When I did Bloomberg Business, I was in New York City, and they wanted me to come in and do an interview at Bloomberg Business. So I go in there, and they said, "Oh, we thought you'd wear your bib overalls and straw hat." I said, "No, this is my town clothes. This is toe to toe with CEOs." And I tell farmers, you will only get what you think you deserve. And if you just think you're an old hayseed blown in no account, then that's what you're going to get.
I'm just a farmer, like you said. But put all the titles that farmer does. They're
Yes.
an electrician, they're a mechanic, they're an
Accountant,
agronomist, they're a veterinarian, they're a businessman, they're an entrepreneur.
Sure.
I mean, you can just go right on down the
That's
list.
right.
Why
That's
shouldn't
right.
they make just as much money?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But then when you look at now, the farmer has a business that has the biggest uncontrollable variable of any business in the world because of weather. You can do everything right, and it either doesn't rain or it rains too much. You have a terrible year. Yet you did everything right.
Yeah, well, on that score, again, I think that part of our mission, our ministry, is to take a lot of that variableness out of it. And so when we start talking about how to ameliorate those things, because there's going to be droughts and floods and cold and hot and all those things. How do we ameliorate those things? And so from a very practical standpoint, we ameliorate them, first of all with high organic matter in soil, which not only cools in heat and warms in cold. Organic matter does both things because you have biological activity, and all those microbes in there sweating, in the soil, Jim. That creates a different thing. And then when you have the aggregate, the big, the glomalin, the soil is kind of like imagine a cathedral. Good soil is like a cathedral with many rooms and compartments, and so all those rooms and compartments need to be full of oxygen and water and kind of a big marshy thing, if you can imagine that. And so organic matter builds more cathedrals in the soil to hold more water. 1 pound of organic matter holds 4 pounds of water. So, for example, on our farm, in 1961, the very first soil samples we took, we were at 1% organic matter. That was our average across the farm. Today, we're 8.2. All right? So every 1% increase in organic matter increases your water holding capacity 20,000 gallons per acre. So we've gone 7 from 1 to 8, say. 7 clicks, 7 times 20,000 is 140,000 gallons of water per acre today that we can hold that we couldn't hold in 1961. That's pretty dramatic. In other words, that means the sponge stays wetter into a drought, and the sponge can accept more in a flood before it overflows. And then another one, of course, is ponds. We've built 15 ponds. We just keep building ponds, and so we can do aeration. We take surface winter runoff that's a flood problem downstream, and we hold that up on high ground that we can then irrigate in the summer, again to ameliorate those kinds of things. And then so there are lots of things, I think, that we can do that is part of extending, we call it redemption into the landscape. Redemption is not just some academic theological focus group thing. There's a very visceral physical aspect to redemption, and we think that we are hands and feet and intellectual capacity of extending spiritual redemption into the landscape. So the point is, we want people, when they come to the farm and visit, and as they leave, we want them to say things like, "Oh, so that's what forgiveness looks like. Oh, so that's what abundant provision looks like. Oh, so those are very visceral, physical things."
Mm-hmm. So if Jerry Brunetti always called it drought proofing your farm. He said, turn your soil into an accordion, and the water will just soak in.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I remember a pastor walk on my dad's farm first time I had heard him, and it was like, wow. But so when you look at agriculture today, do you see a movement in the regenerative way and coming to significant scale? You see it a lot more with ranching and things like that in Kansas and the Dakotas. Do you see that movement going into production ag?
Well, I'd like to say yes. I mean, we're still very, very small. But again, when chemical fertilizer jumps 400%, and you can't, and petroleum, fuel prices, back was it about 12 years ago when fuel really spiked real high, and I read a report that said the average farmer in America, half of their expense is fuel, and that struck me as, wow, that's a lot, and so I did a self audit of us. I looked at the books and said, okay, so what's ours, and ours was 5%. And we run 2 delivery trucks into DC, and so I put all that in, okay, just so we all know. And it struck me, look, I don't like high diesel prices any more than anybody else, but I realized, goodness, it could go to $12 a gallon, and we'd still be okay. And that's where resiliency comes in. So we need to be thinking about these inputs that are either now hard to get or very expensive. How do we reduce those? And so I think generally nobody changes until they're in crisis. I mean, that's just human nature, right? As long as everything's good, nobody changes. And so with the things that I've just mentioned, I think that there is increasing interest on both the part of consumers and the part of farmers to figure out a way. One way I've heard it is to disentangle from this system. That's the phrase I'm hearing, and I love the phrase. People say, I just want to disentangle. That's what's driving the cryptocurrency craze, right? Is people are, and I'm not suggesting that it's good or bad or indifferent. I don't know. It's way over my pay grade. But I do know that what's driving people to cryptocurrency is a desire to disentangle from the system.
Does disentangle mean for a farmer get off the drug?
So for a farmer, disentangling has a lot of ramifications. One is to obviously create in situ fertility. And so, forever, we've never bought a bag of chemical fertilizer. We've never bought a bag of chemical fertilizer in 60 years. What do? What we did buy was a great big industrial wood chipper that'll take 19-inch material. That's our fertilizer factory. So we go to the woods and we're cutting, crooked, diseased, junk trees, working in fence lines, the stuff that people pile up and burn. That's our carbon. And that's our fertilizer. So we're integrating the woodland with the open land. That brings both fungi into the bacterial pasture. I mean, I'm maybe going a little bit too
Keep
deep
going,
here.
love it.
Okay, but integrating forest land with or let's say forest land with open land, integrating that, now suddenly we're actually creating a carbon economy that's being driven by true solar energy, green leaves, chlorophyll, photosynthesis. I mean, that's the ultimate solar collector, and so it's in situ. Our fertility is driven in situ. The fact is that if all the money currently spent on chemical fertilizer were instead invested in a true localized carbon economy, including the national forests and everything that needs to be, I'm a permaculture lover, that we need more forest and fewer trees. So, all the forests east of the Mississippi are weedy. They're too crowded. All right, they need to be thinned, and including the out west where all the fires are. We spend $5 billion a year fighting forest fires. All of that biomass and carbon that's volatile could be chipped to run an earthworm, an earthworm feeding operation, okay, nationwide. And so that is one way that a farmer can disentangle from a fertility standpoint, generating their own fertility. And then on the other end, the sale end, to begin putting together what I call food clusters, where because most farmers aren't, okay, let's face it, most farmers aren't great marketers. Okay, they're just not. And so what they need to do is team up with people who are good marketers, and create, kind of community clusters. I mean, this is what the Amish have done, right? By having however many dairies it takes. You have a cheese processing facility. So how many dairies does it take? How many harness makers does it take? How many horse breeders does it take? And so in the Amish community, the dollar turns around 7 times before it leaves that community. That's what I'm talking about. And so if we start, sharing tractors, sharing equipment, sharing expertise, and we start developing complementary things. I mean, our farm, we collaborate with about 10 or 12 other artisanal food and fiber makers. We have everything from pasta to cosmetics, lip balm, chocolate milk, regular milk, cheese, broth, we don't do it all, but we're friendly with people in the area who do. And all of that can go on our truck, which essentially creates a doorstep supermarket, but locally sourced, not across UPS. And so I think that as these dynamics start to change the context, that will become more and more viable as we move forward. If what we're seeing right now is a trend line, and we're not going to suddenly have a ferry drop in and give us $2 gas and
I'm not expecting that ferry.
I'm not expecting that ferry either, and so if where we are is a harbinger of things to come, these are the ways you disentangle. So farmers start. I mean, I've helped a couple actually, with multiple poultry houses. Eliminate their contract.
Really?
Yeah, eliminate their contract and go to a branded direct marketed thing. It's wonderful, and they couldn't. It's not easy, but they couldn't be happier. And so those are the kind of transitions. Just remember, the more entangled you are, the harder it is to disentangle.
Well, and part of that drug isn't just fertility; it's also the debt. And that when you say, converting a chicken house that they had a contract for, usually they're building that chicken house with that contract, and they've got $750,000 in debt they're taking on, and they can't survive without that contract. That's what they've been told.
Yes.
Same thing with the size of a tractor. But
absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, I'm thinking of like when we started really increasing our composting. I mean, when we started, I did it all with a shovel. I'm at the age where the older I get, the better I was. That, and so we did that. But then I had a neighbor with a front end loader. As the fertility started coming up, and we started, we've actually got some grass here, and we can have more cows, and so it started coming up, and it got more than I could handle, by hand. And I had a neighbor with a front end loader, and he'd come down and work. Farmers aren't used to getting paid anything anyway, and he'd come and work for pretty cheap with his front end loader, and kept me from having to buy one for 3 years. Well, that 3 years again, I'm back to the turtle. The turtle wins. The rabbit doesn't, right? In the Aesop fable. And so I'm a big believer in that we need to be concerned about trajectory more than speed. If you're getting toward where you want to go, don't get completely frustrated or covered up about how fast you're going. Just keep heading that direction. If it's slow, that's fine, because speed kills. Speed you can definitely go too fast. My dad used to call it overrunning your headlights. and so that's a good thing. But yeah, I think that disentanglement is on a lot of areas, and
and it's scary.
It is.
It's a human emotion too.
Sure, it's scary. I mean, the thought of not taking your grain to an elevator. One of the funnest things that I've done numerous times in Illinois, Indiana, in grain country, is with a room of farmers and build 2 scenarios, one growing grain and one growing pasture with good management. Most pasture is not managed well, and so it's very, very poor production. But if you go to, in our county, the average cow days per acre is 80 cow days per acre in our county. A cow day is what 1 cow will eat in a day. So in other words, 1 acre will support 80 cows for 1 day a year, or 1 cow for 80 days a year. All right, that's our average in our county. We average 400. Okay, we average 400. We've never planted a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer. I'm not saying that proudly. I'm saying that humbly, that these systems work. But the average farmer is not aware of these things. So you got this corn farmer in Kankakee, Illinois, and he has no clue what a return to prairie in that rich. Every time I go up there, I just covet. This black, deep, So if I go 18 inches, I'm on to limestone, right? Yeah, I got no soil, and I go out there and it's this thick soil, Indiana, that area, and in general, 100 bushel acre corn is equivalent to 400 cow day grass. 200 bushel an acre corn is equivalent to 800 cow day grass, okay? And so you can actually do a real easy, quick comparison of grain versus prairie put through either beef or dairy. And I have never done this exercise in which the animals lost. The animals win every time. Why? Because you don't have to have a combine. You don't have to, it self-fertilizes. You don't have to plant anything. You don't have to, it's self-harvesting. You don't have to drive it. Get rid of all your equipment, and just let it be a perennial solar-based. You're just moving them around. You got electric fence and water line. That's your infrastructure. And otherwise, you either walk, ride your horse, or get on your four-wheeler, or my on-farm get-around machine is a 1989 Ford Bronco with all the windows out of it, and it's the most fantastic thing. $1,800. It's cheaper than a horse, and the thing, way cheaper than a side-by-side or a four-wheeler. Respecting farmers are supposed to have ATVs and side-by-sides and all that.
I'll take your Ford Bronco.
I don't care. And I can haul 4 people in it besides me. I got room in the back, high, low, 5 speed on the train. The thing will climb a tree. It's a wonderful little machine.
Does it have the big 460 in it, or is it the 350?
No, it's a little one.
Okay.
It's a little one. But, it's way more powerful than a side-by-side. And so you could pull a hay wagon with it, and it's a wonderful thing.
And they're back cheap. In style.
Sure. And there were millions of them made, so parts are cheap, easy to work on, So there again, I'm just so glad I'm not peer dependent. We're always looking for, what works, and I really don't care if the neighbor thinks I'm nuts. I really don't.
Back to your beef example, that we had John Kempf on, and he ran through the math on that real quick, and he was just using commodity beef.
Sure, that's right.
And
that's what I do.
Talking about having your own brand or building your own farm business.
That's right.
Add on more margin.
Just commodity beef. That's exactly.
But all you hear is that there's no money in having hay or pasture. That's my least productive ground.
Well, that's what farmers have done because in our culture. This is cultural DNA. The Holy Grail, when the Europeans came here, the Holy Grail was grain. If grain was expensive. If you read Thomas Jefferson's farm book, and you look at the ratio, the relative costs of different things in that day, today, if grain were as expensive today as it was in Thomas Jefferson's time, corn right now would be $40 a bushel.
Oh.
All right. Well, as soon as corn goes to $40 a bushel, guess what happens to grain-fed beef? You don't have grain-fed beef. You fatten it on grass. All right? And guess what happens to chicken? It now is not the cheap meat. It's the expensive meat, which if you look prior to the Industrial Revolution, poultry was always the meat of kings. The peasant meat was pork and beef, because beef could eat unplanted stuff. You didn't have to plant anything to have beef. If you have a lawn, you could have beef, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big problems with all these meat substitutes, beyond beef and Impossible Burger and all this fake meat stuff, is it is ultimately an incredibly undemocratic food system. Because with real food, with a cow, if I've got a piece of grass, I can grow food. But if we're all eating fake meat out of a laboratory and I'm dependent on that, suddenly who controls the laboratory controls my food system. Mm-hmm. And so real food is actually a very, what I call a whosoever will. It's a whosoever will opportunity. Impossible Burger, fake meat, and pseudo food. I mean, MSG, red dye 29. That is not a whosoever will. You have to have $1 million laboratory to concoct high fructose corn syrup and MSG and these things. So real authentic food, that was before 1900, is a big change. So, as we head down this path, I think there will be definitely opportunities that we can't even imagine here around the ragged edge, this ragged edge of whatever's coming down the pike. And I don't think I've ever been so excited for the future, for where we are now, because I think there's just going to be this, well, I call it the ragged edge of disturbance that's going to create some real neat niches for a lot of things.
Well, and I think COVID did a little bit of, COVID helped a little bit with that, because it made people look at their food supply and see, hey, can I talk? There's a farmer that's a couple miles from me. Can I talk to him? Can we get beef from you? Can we get chicken, eggs, whatever? And with the supply chain issues, like your global food hubs, I find that super exciting, because once people either buy meat or something from their neighbor farm or grow it themselves, I think growing it yourself is the best option. It's different.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is the whole the whole health aspect of this, the wellness health aspect, is huge, because when you can't afford gas to get to town, when things start to break up, or when the city, when it's so unsafe from crumbling cities that you don't want to go anywhere. You want to. There was a fascinating Trends 2020 was a forecasting book way back in a 20. What was it? Trends 2000 is what it was. It came in the 1990s, and one of the things that one of the trends that they documented in there was what they called cocooning, and it's where people don't want to go out because it's too unsafe to go out. The cities are burning. There's riffraff in the street. Nobody's getting prosecuted for crimes. Blah blah blah, and so people cocoon. Well, as that develops, one of the things that people really want to hang on to is their health. And so this whole and of course the industrial food system has gotten so unhealthy with all the additives and nutrient deficiency in it, that you really that's really stimulated this whole wellness. There's a kind of part of this agrarian bunker thing is also an interest in herbalism and homemade salves and concoctions and how do we make our own antihistamines and our own melatonin and all this stuff, and it's spawning this entire kind of DIY do-it-yourself kind of mentality, and so anybody in that space is in a place to ride this I think for a little while. Mm-hmm. I mean, my own book sales, I've written 15 books, and the first one was Pastured Poultry Profits, came out in 1991, and I'm looking back, and when we did that book about pastured poultry, I was told at that time by people who know the business, well, the life of this book's about 10 years. It'll sell and then it'll peak and then it'll fall off about 10 years. That book is selling more today than it did in 1991, which to me indicates that this is a rising tide that is moving, and you don't know what tipping points, inflection points there are that really tip something forward in this. But certainly we're in one now. The war in Ukraine, inflation, the whole healthcare system. I mean, it's just a wreck, so there is an awakening, I think, in the country, and it's just gonna one neighbor to another.
Well, and Joel, I think you've certainly helped that awakening happen, and really appreciate you being here to guide people through that, and appreciate you taking the time to be on today. We got some speeches going on this afternoon, so want to get you on your way, but thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. It was a delightful and honor to be with you.
Thanks, Joel.